So, hello and welcome back. We are back with Ivanhoe, which we kind of left on a bit of a cliffhanger. I mean, as much of a cliffhanger as we've gotten so far, where Ivanhoe has won the day, even though the evil Prince John was trying to give it to anybody else, and he was doing the whole accolades from the Queen of Love and Beauty when he was unmasked unwillingly, and then it was discovered that he took a wound, so he's got a head of a lance embedded in his side somewhere, which I don't know. I'm sorry, back in medieval times I feel like that's usually maybe not a death sentence. I'm sure people lived with disabilities and things, but I don't think I would want to trust myself to medieval medicine. Hopefully, well, given how much book is still left, I think he'll be fine, or mostly fine, but we'll have to wait and see. I hope everybody had a good weekend. I had a pretty good weekend, you know? It was never long enough, but I did have a pretty good weekend. But that's about it. We're going to be jumping back in with chapter 13 and a quote from the Iliad. So I guess we'll see if ancient Greek is more comprehensible than ancient English with the quote from the Iliad. Heroes approach, Atrides thus aloud. Stand forth distinguished from the circling crowd. Ye who by skill or mainly force may claim your rivals to surpass and merit fame. This cow worth 20 oxen is decreed for him who farthest sends the winged reed. And that's from the Iliad. I feel like context in some of these quotes would be a little welcome. It makes me feel a little bit ignorant to do these quotes and not really have a clue what context I'm supposed to be reading them in. But anyway, enough of that. Let us move on to chapter 13 of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. The name of Ivanhoe was no sooner pronounced than it flew from mouth to mouth with all the celerity with which eagerness could convey and curiosity receive. It was not long before it reached the circle of the prince, whose brow darkened as he heard the news. Looking around him, however, with an air of scorn, he said, "My lords, and especially you, Sir Prior, what think ye of the doctrine the learned tell us concerning the innate attractions and antipathies? Methinks that I felt the presence of my brother's minion, even when I least guessed who yonder suit of armor was enclosing. Fondeboeuf must prepare to restore his fief of Ivanhoe," said De Bracy, who, having discharged his part honorably in the tournament, had laid his shield and helmet aside, and again was mingling with the prince's retinue. "Aye," said Wadimir Fitzruse, "this gallant is likely to reclaim the castle and manor which Richard assigned to him, and which your highness's generosity has since given to Fondeboeuf." "Fondeboeuf," said John, "is a man more willing to swallow 3 manors, such as Ivanhoe, than to disgorge of one of them. For the rest, sirs, I hope that none here will deny my right to confer the fiefs of the crown upon the faithful followers who are around me, and who are ready to perform the usual military service in the room of those who have wandered foreign countries, and can not render me homage or service when called upon." The audience were too much interested in the question not to pronounce the prince's assumed right altogether indubitable. "A generous prince, a most noble lord, who thus takes upon himself the task of rewarding his faithful." Such were the words which burst from the train, expectants all of similar grants at the expense of King Richard's followers and favorites, if indeed they had not already received them. Prior Aymer also assented to the general proposition, saying, however, that blessed Jerusalem could not indeed be termed a foreign country. She was, communis mater, the mother of all Christians. But he saw not, he declared, how the knight of Ivanhoe could plead any advantage from this, since he, the prior, was assured that the Crusaders under Richard had never gotten much farther than Ascalon, which, as all the world knew, was a town of the Philistines, and entitled to none of the privilege of the Holy City. Wadmar, whose curiosity had led him towards the place where Ivanhoe had fallen, now returned. "The gallant," he said, "is likely to give your highness little disturbance, and he is likely to leave Fondeboeuf in the quiet possession of his gains. The man is wounded." "Whatever becomes of him," said Prince John, "he is a victor of the day, and were he tenfold our enemy, or the devoted friend of our brother, which is one and the same, his wounds must be looked to. My own physician will attend him." A stern smile curled the prince's lip as he spoke. Wadimir Fitzroos hastened to reply that Ivanhoe was already removed from the lists, and he was in the custody of friends. "I was somewhat afflicted," he said, "to see the grief of the Queen of Love and Beauty, whose sovereignty of a day this event has changed into mourning. I am not a man to be moved by a woman's lament for her lover, but this same Lady Rowena suppressed her sorrow with such dignity that it could only be discovered by her folded hands and her tearless eye, which trembled as it remained fixed upon the lifeless form in front of her." "Who is this Lady Rowena?" Prince John asked, "of who we have heard so much?" "A Saxon heiress of large possessions," said Prior Aymer, "a rose of loveliness and a jewel of wealth, the fairest among 1,000, a bundle of myrrh, a cluster of camphire." "We cherish her sorrow," said Prince John, "and amend her blood by we will wed her to a Norman. She seems a minor, and must therefore be at our royal disposal in marriage. What do you say, De Bracy? What do you think of gaining fair lands and livings by wedding a Saxon, after the fashion of the followers of the Conqueror?" "If the lands are my liking," said De Bracy, "it will be hard to displease me with a bride, and deeply will I hold myself bound to your highness for such a good deal, which will fulfill all promises made in favor of your servant vassal." "We will not forget," said Prince John, "and that we may instantly go to work, command our seneschal right now to order the attendance of the Lady Rowena and all of her company, that is, the rude churl that her guardian is, and the Saxon ox who the Black Knight struck down in the tournament. Command them to come and join me this evening in banquet. De Bigot," he said to his seneschal, "thou wilt word our second summons so courteously as to gratify the pride of these Saxons, and to make it impossible for them again to refuse me, although by the bones of Becket, courtesy to them is casting pearls before swine." Prince John had proceeded thus far, and was about to give the signal for retiring from the lists, when a small billet was put into his hand. "Who is this from?" said Prince John, looking at the person by whom it had been delivered. "From foreign parts, my lord, but from whence I know not," said his attendant. "A Frenchman brought it hither, who said he had ridden night and day to put it into the hands of your highness." The prince looked narrowly at the writing, and then at the seal, placed so as to secure the fox silk with which the billet was surrounded, and which bore the impression of 3 fleurs de lis. John then opened the billet with apparent agitation, which visibly and greatly increased when he had perused the contents, which were expressed with these words: "Take heed to yourself. The devil is unchained." The prince went pale as death, looked first upon the earth and then up to the heaven, like a man who has received news that the sentence of execution has been passed on him. Recovering from the first effects of this surprise, he took Waldemar Fitzruse and De Bracy to one side, and put the letter into their hands. It means," he said in a faltering voice, "my brother Richard has obtained his freedom." "It may be a false alarm, or a forgery," said De Bracy. "It's in France's own hand and seal," said Prince John. "It is time, then," said Fitzruse, "to draw our party to a head, either at York or some other central place. A few days later, and it will indeed be too late. Your Highness must break short this mummery." "The yeomen and the commons," said De Bracy, "must not be discontented for lack of their share in the sport, though." "The day," said Waldemar, "is not yet very far spent. Let the archers shoot a few rounds at the target, and the prize be adjudged. This will be an abundant fulfillment of the prince's promises, so far as this herd of Saxon serfs is concerned." "Thank you, Waldemar," said the prince. "You remind me, too, that I have a debt to pay to that insolent peasant who yesterday insulted us. Our banquet also shall go forward tonight, as we had planned. Were this my last hour of power, it would be an hour sacred to revenge and pleasure. Let new cares come with tomorrow." The sound of the trumpet soon recalled those spectators who had already begun to leave the field, and proclamation was made that Prince John, suddenly called by high public duties, did still hold himself obliged to discontinue the events of tomorrow, but he was unwilling that so many good yeomen should depart without a trial of skill, and he was pleased to let them know that before leaving the ground we would execute a competition of archery today, not tomorrow. To the best archer a prize was to be awarded, this being a bugle horn mounted with silver and a silken baldric richly ornamented with a medallion of St. Hubert, the patron of the sylvan sports. More than 30 yeomen at first presented themselves as competitors, several of whom were rangers and underkeepers of the royal forests of Needwood and Charnwood. When, however, the archers understood with whom they were to be matched, upwards of 20 of them withdrew from the contest, unwilling to encounter the dishonor of almost certain defeat. For back in those days, the skill of each celebrated marksman was as well known for many miles around him as the qualities of a horse trained at Newmarket are familiar to those who frequent that well-known meet. The diminished list of competitors for the sylvan fame still came to 8. Prince John stepped from his royal seat to view closely the person of those chosen yeomen, several of whom were wearing royal livery. Having satisfied his curiosity with his investigation, he then looked for the object of his resentment, who he saw standing in the same spot and with the same composed face that he had exhibited the preceding day. "My fellow," said Prince John, "I guessed by thy insolent babble that thou wert no true lover of the longbow, and I see thou darest not adventure your skill among such merry men as are standing yonder." "Under favor, sir," said the yeoman, "I have another reason for refraining to shoot, besides fearing discomfiture and disgrace." "And what is your reason?" said Prince John, who, for some cause which perhaps he could not himself have explained, felt very curious about this individual. "Because," said the woodsman, "I know not if these yeomen and I are used to shooting at the same marks, and because, moreover, I know not how your grace might relish the winning of a third prize by one who has unwittingly fallen under your displeasure." Prince John's face colored as he put the question to the yeoman. "What is your name?" "Locksley," said the yeoman. "Well then, Locksley," said Prince John, "thou shalt shoot in thy turn when these yeomen have displayed their skill. If you win the prize, I will add to it 20 nobles, but if you lose, you will be stripped of your Lincoln green and scourged out of the lists with bowstrings for a worldly and insolent braggart." "And what about if I refuse to shoot against this wager?" said the yeoman. "Your grace's power, supported as it is by so many men at arms, may indeed easily strip and scourge me, but you cannot compel me to bend or draw my bow." "If you refuse," said the prince, "the provost of the list will cut your bowstring, break your bow and your arrows, and expel you from the presence as a faint-hearted craven." "This is no fair choice you've given me, proud prince," said the yeoman, "to compel me to peril myself against the best archers of Leicester and Staffordshire, under the penalty of infamy if they overshoot me. None the less, I will obey." "Look to him close, men at arms," said Prince John. "His heart is sinking. I am jealous lest he attempt to escape the trial. And do you, good fellows, shoot boldly. A buck and a butt of wine are ready for your refreshment in yonder tent, once you win the prize." Then a target was placed at the upper end of the southern avenue that led to the lists. The contending archers took their station in turn at the bottom of the southern access, the distance between that station and the mark allowing full distance for what was called a shot at rovers. The archers, having previously determined by lot the order of precedence, were to shoot each 3 arrows in succession. The sports were regulated by an inferior ranked officer, termed the provost of the games, for the high rank of the marshals of the lists would have been held as degraded if they had condescended to superintend the sports of archery. One by one, the archers, stepping forward, delivered their shafts, yeoman-like and bravely. Of 24 arrows shot in succession, 10 hit the target, and the others ranged so close that, considering how far away the mark was, it was all accounted as good archery. Of the 10 shafts which hit the target, 2 within the inner ring were shot by Hubert, a forester in the service of Malvision, who was accordingly pronounced the winner. "Now, Locksley," said Prince John to the bold yeoman with a bitter smile, "will you try conclusions with Hubert, or will you yield up your bow, baldric, and quiver to the provost of this sport?" "Sith it be no better," said Locksley, "I am content to try my fortune, on the condition that when I have shot 2 shafts at yonder mark of Hubert, he will be bound to shoot 1 at the target I propose." "That's fair," said Prince John, "and it shall not be refused to thee. If you beat this braggart Hubert, I will fill that bugle with silver pennies for you." "All I can do is my best," said Hubert, "but my grandsire drew a good longbow at Hastings. I trust not to dishonor him." The old target was now removed, and a fresh one of the similar size placed in its room. Hubert, who, as victor in the first trial of skill, had the right to shoot first, and took his aim with great deliberation, measuring the distance with his eye, while he held his hand on his bent bow, with the arrow placed upon the string. Finally, he made a step forward, and raising the bow at the full stretch of his left arm until the center of the grasping piece was nigh level with his face, he drew his bowstring to his ear. The arrow whistled through the air and lit within the inner ring of the target, but not exactly in the middle. "You haven't allowed for wind, Hubert," said Locksley, bending his bow. "Or had that been a better shot?" And with that, and without showing the least anxiety to pause upon his aim, Locksley stepped up to the appointed station and shot his arrow as carelessly in appearance as if he had not even looked at the mark. He was speaking almost at the instant that the shaft left the bowstring, and yet it alighted in the target 2 inches closer to the white spot which marked the center. "By the light of heaven," said Prince John, "are you going to suffer that Rungate knave to overcome you? Huh! If you do, you're worthy of the gallows." Hubert had but one set speech for all occasions. "If your highness were to hang me," he said, "a man can but do his best. None the less, my grandsire drew a good bow, and—" "Oh, the foul fiend on your grandsire and all of his generation," said Prince John. "Shoot, and shoot your best, or it's going to go bad for you." And with that Hubert resumed his place, and not neglecting the caution that he had received from his adversary, he made all the necessary allowance for the very light air of wind which had just come up, and shot so successfully that his arrow alighted in the exact center of the target. "Hubert! Hubert!" shouted the onlookers, more interested in someone they knew than a stranger. "In the clout! In the clout! Hubert forever!" "Top that, Locksley," said the prince with an insulting smile. "I'll notch his arrow shaft for him," said Locksley, and letting fly his arrow with a little more precaution than the one before, it lit right upon that of his competitor, which it split to shivers. The people who stood around were so astonished at this dexterity that they could not even give vent to their surprise. "This must be the devil, not a man of flesh and blood," they whispered to each other. "Such archery never seen, never since a bow was first bent in Britain." "And now," said Locksley, "I will carve your grace's permission to plant such a mark as is used in the north country, and I welcome every brave yeoman who shall try a shot to it with a smile from the bonny lass that he loves the best." Locksley then turned to leave the lists. "Let your guards attend me," he said, "if you please. I go but to cut a rod from the next willow bush." Prince John signaled that some attendant should follow him in case he tried to escape, but the cry of shame which burst from the multitude induced him to stop his ungenerous idea. Locksley returned almost immediately with a willow wand about 6 feet in length, perfectly straight, and rather thicker than a man's thumb. He began peeling this with great composure, observing at the same time to ask a good woodsman to shoot at a target so broad as had heretofore been used, to put shame upon his own skill. For his own part, he said, and in the land where he was bred, men would soon take for their mark King Arthur's Round Table, which held 60 knights around it. "A child of 7," he said scornfully, "might hit yonder target with even a headless shaft, but," he added, walking deliberately to the end of the lists and sticking the willow wand into the ground, "the one that can hit that rod at 50 yards, I call him an archer fit to bear bow and quiver before a king, if it were the stout King Richard himself." "My grandsire," said Hubert, drew a good bow at the Battle of Hastings, and never shot at such a mark in his life, and neither will I. If this yeoman can cleave that rod, I give him the bucklers, or rather I yield to the devil that's in his jerkin, not to any human skill. Man can do his best, and I will not shoot where I am sure to miss. I might as well shoot at the edge of our parson's whittle, or at a wheat straw, or a sunbeam, as a twinkling white streak that I can barely see. You coward, said Prince John. Sirrah Locksley, I want you to shoot. But if you hit such a mark, I will say that you are the first to ever do so. However it be, thou shalt not crow over us with a mere show of skill. I'll do my best, as Hubert says, said Locksley. No man can do more. And saying that, he again bent his bow, but upon the present occasion he looked with great attention to his weapon, and he changed the string, which he thought was no longer truly round, having been a bit frayed by his last two shots. He then took his aim with deliberation, and the crowd waited the event with breathless silence. He vindicated their opinion of his skill, and his arrow split the willow rod against which it was aimed. A jubilee of acclamation followed. Even Prince John, in admiration of Locksley's skill, lost for a moment his dislike of the man. Those 20 nobles, he said, which, with the bugle, you have fairly won. They're yours. We will make it 50 if you will take livery and join us in service as a yeoman of my bodyguard, so that you can be near us. For never did so strong a hand bend a bow, or so true an eye direct its shaft. Your pardon, my prince, said Locksley, but I have vowed that if I ever take service, it would be with your royal brother, King Richard. These 20 nobles I leave to Hubert, who on this day has drawn as brave a bow as his grandsire ever did at Hastings. Had his modesty not refused the trial, I'm sure he would have hit the wand as well as I did. Hubert shook his head, as he received with reluctance the bounty of the stranger, and Locksley, anxious to escape further observation, mixed in with the crowd and was seen no more. The victorious archer would not perhaps have escaped Prince John's attention so easily, had not the prince had other things on his mind, more important things. He called upon his chamberlain as he gave the signal to retreat from the lists, and commanded him to instantly gallop to Ashby and seek out Isaac. Tell that dog, he said, to send me before sundown 2,000 crowns. He knows the security, but thou mayest show him this ring for token. The rest of the money must be paid at York within 6 days. If he neglects, I'll have the unbelieving villain's head. Look that thou pass him not on the way, for the circumcised slave was displaying his finery amongst us. And after he said that, Prince John mounted his horse and returned to Ashby, with the whole crowd breaking up and dispersing as he left. And that is the end of the chapter. So I do believe that, at least according to everything I have seen or read, that was definitely Robin Hood. And was it playing out the whole Robin Hood with, who was that? That was Kevin Costner that played Robin Hood. I remember that one. Yeah, playing out that scene. And of course the Robin Hood Men in Tights scene, which was much more lampooned. I need to rewatch those movies. I haven't seen the Kevin Costner Robin Hood movie. God, it's been a very long time. I do remember seeing it on videotape, which just tells you how long ago it was that I saw it. I enjoyed that chapter. It still had the chewy language, but I think I'm getting a handle on it. I'm not reading a sentence nearly as often and having to like stop and translate it in my head so I even know what I said. So hopefully that's being conveyed to you guys. But as always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you as always to my two patrons. I really appreciate you guys and hope that you are enjoying the offerings over there in Patreon. Again, I did put up a free Patreon story, so if you're interested, you can go check it out. I don't guarantee that the sound quality is the best because I did read it outside so that I could have little birds land on my finger. I miss doing that. I need to make friends with some of this current generation of birds. Anyway, thank you as always for listening. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out, and I will see you tomorrow.